The dirt road seemed to have no end, while the car swayed slightly over the stones that scattered across the path. The sun was setting, and the sky was a deep, almost oppressive orange. Clara, in the passenger seat, kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, trying to ignore the feeling of discomfort that had accompanied her since they left the city. When they finally saw the house, everyone in the car fell silent. The mansion, old and imposing, seemed to resist time with its stained walls and windows that stared at the family like empty eyes. The weathered wood creaked under the touch of the wind. But what really caught their attention was the feeling of something alive, as if the house was watching them. Clara squeezed the arm of João, her husband, who kept his eyes fixed on the road, without noticing the slight goosebumps that ran across her skin. The children, Pedro and Ana, got out of the car first, excited by the news. They ran toward the front door, which opened with a low, unsettling creak. The sound echoed throughout the house, disappearing into silence soon after. Clara hesitated before entering, feeling a strange heaviness in the air, almost as if the room was breathing around them. As soon as they crossed the threshold of the door, a gentle stream of wind passed by them like a greeting. But there was something more to that wind, something almost imperceptible. João ran his hand through his hair, ignoring the sensation, and went straight to exploring the rooms. Clara, in turn, remained there, standing in the entrance hall, looking at the stairs that led to the upper floor. The faint sound, like a distant sigh, almost escaped his notice. It was Ana who first commented, "Mommy, did you hear that?" Clara frowned, but before she could respond, João returned from the next room with a distracted smile, asking about the tidying up. Nobody talked about the sound anymore. Not that night. Except for Ana, who, when lying down on the old bed in the new room, could no longer forget that soft sound. A whisper, as if the house itself was trying to talk to her. Texto padrão. And then, in the darkness, when everyone was already asleep, the whispers began to intensify. That night, the darkness seemed thicker than usual, enveloping the house like a cloak. The windows fluttered slightly in the wind, and the moon could barely pierce the dense clouds in the sky. Ana lay down on her bed, her wide eyes staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what she had heard earlier. It was the wind, it had to be the wind. But no matter how much she repeated it to herself, something was wrong. A shiver ran through his skin, and the sound, that soft, almost imperceptible sound, returned. It wasn't the wind. It was something more intimate, more familiar, like a voice only she could hear. At first, the whispers were light, words that were lost before they were understood. Ana tried to turn over, cover her ears with the pillow, but the words, or were they thoughts? They continued to flow, creeping through the darkness, penetrating his mind in a way that was both intriguing and terrifying. She didn't understand everything that was being said, but the tone, suddenly the whisper changed. It was no longer a random murmur. It was a clear, sharp word that made her heart beat faster. Truth. Ana got up from the bed, her body tense, her bare feet touching the cold floor. She followed the sound, almost hypnotized, leaving the room and going down the stairs. The steps creaked under her weight, but the whispers guided her steps, pulling her to the living room. And it was there, in the muffled silence of the early morning, that she stopped abruptly. The house seemed to breathe around her, and this time the whispers came from all sides, surrounding her like shadows, revealing something else, something that was just beginning to awaken. Suddenly, the door to João's room, her father, opened silently, as if the house was waiting for him too. João woke up from a restless sleep, with his mind heavy as if he were trying to escape from a strange dream that he couldn't remember. The silence of the house, deep and oppressive, made him feel something different in the air, an invisible weight that seemed to be stuck to his skin. He looked at the clock on the bedside table, 3 in the morning, always at 3. He stood up slowly, trying not to make any noise. There was something bothering him, an annoyance he couldn't explain. That was when he realized that the bedroom door was ajar, as if it had been pushed by a breeze that never arrived. That was enough to trigger an alert in his mind, but something kept him silent. An invisible force, almost like a call, guided him. João walked down the dark hallway, his feet making the floor creak with each step. He headed to the living room, where the moonlight barely entered through the worn curtains. Everything seemed calm, except for a distant, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper. It was impossible to ignore it now. That voice was talking to him, and the worst part, it knew things that no one else knew. Things that João would never admit, not even to himself. He stood still in the middle of the room, trying to push away the uncomfortable thought that was growing in his mind, but the words kept creeping like snakes through his memories. Something about the past. The whisper mentioned a name that João hadn't heard in years, that he had sworn to bury in a dark corner of his soul. His fists clenched, his heart raced, and he realized that he wasn't alone in his own mind. He turned around, feeling a presence around him, almost as if the house was watching his every move. At that moment, Ana, his daughter, was coming down the stairs, her eyes fixed on something that João couldn't see. Was she hearing the same whispers? And if they were, what else would the house reveal on that dark night? Ana walked down the stairs with a calmness that didn't seem to belong to a girl her age. Her eyes were distant, as if they were fixed on something only she could see. João watched in silence, unsure whether to call out to her or wait to see what she would do. The whisper, that damned whisper, seemed louder now. It was no longer just a sound in the back of her mind. It was almost as if it were filling the air around them. Hannah stopped at the foot of the stairs, not looking at her father. Her bare feet touched the cold wooden floor, and the shadow of the moon illuminated her face in a pale, almost unearthly way. For a moment, João wondered if the girl was sleepwalking. But then she spoke, her voice low and whispery, almost as if she were echoing the very murmurs of the house. "Mommy heard it too, but she doesn't want to believe it," Ana said, the words coming out soft and slow. "But they're talking to us. They know everything." João took a step forward, his heart clenching. Who were they? What was his daughter hearing? He wanted to hold her shoulders, wake her from this strange trance. But something stopped him, an almost palpable presence that filled the room as if the house were alive around them. Ana finally looked at him, but her eyes, there was something different in them. They weren't the eyes of the daughter he knew. There was a dark gleam there, an understanding that shouldn't be in a child. "You heard, didn't you, Daddy?" She tilted her head slightly, a small smile on her lips. "They told your secret too." João froze, his fingers trembling at his sides. Those words. How could Ana know? She didn't know. She couldn't know. But the whispers continued, soft and merciless, snaking around his mind. And the most disturbing thing was, she was right. At the top of the stairs, Clara watched everything in silence, as if she had known for a long time that something was wrong with this house. Clara had always been the most skeptical of the family. While John and the children were immersed in the excitement of the move, she kept her feet on the ground, unmoved by her emotions. But that night, something woke her from a restless sleep. A heaviness in the air, a sense that something was deeply wrong. She got up from the bed slowly, trying to ignore the strange chill that seemed to have taken over the room. The silence of the house, which should have been comforting, now seemed heavy, oppressive. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. Her eyes wandered to the hallway, where she saw the faint light of the moon vaguely illuminating the stairs. At first, she thought it was just the play of shadows, but then she heard it. It wasn't a clear noise, something that could be easily explained. It was whispers. Low, insistent, and most disturbingly, they seemed to be calling to her. Clara followed the sound, each step she took echoing softly in the hallway. When she reached the top of the stairs, she saw John and Ana down there, standing in the dark, as if they were engaged in a conversation that made no sense. But what made her stop and press her lips together in despair was what she heard. Not from their mouths, but from the whispers around her. They were talking about her family. They weren't just any words. They were thoughts that had never been spoken aloud, desires that she had never admitted to feeling. And most disturbingly, Clara began to realize that the whispers were not talking about her, but about her children. Things that Ana, her little Ana, should never know. Feelings that Pedro had never shown. Secrets that should have stayed buried, but that now floated in the air like an unwanted truth, a weight she could not bear. Clara felt a lump form in her throat as the whispers continued. They did not ask for answers. They already knew. And what they revealed about her family was terrible, a shadow deeper than anything else in that house. Trying to calm her breathing, Clara took another step. It was as if the house was stripping everyone's souls bare, revealing the parts that no one wanted to face. And then, she heard the attic door creak. Pedro had always been the most curious one in the family, the kind who liked to explore, to open doors that no one else noticed. Ever since he was little, his fascination with the unknown had gotten him into trouble, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for what he was about to find that night. While the house seemed to whisper secrets around the others, Pedro felt something different, an irresistible attraction, as if something or someone was calling him. It was in the middle of one of those moments when everyone seemed lost in their own thoughts that he noticed the door. It was in the attic, a place that until then no one seemed to have given much importance to. However, there it was now, a solid and disturbing presence, standing out as if it had always been waiting, but invisible until that moment. Pedro stood in front of the door for a long time, his heart beating faster than it should. He didn't know how to explain it, but the feeling that something was waiting for him on the other side grew stronger with every second. When he finally reached for the doorknob, a cold draft ran down his spine, and he felt as if he were about to cross a line that shouldn't be crossed. But curiosity, damn curiosity, consumed him. The doorknob was cold to the touch, and to his surprise, the door wasn't locked. With a gentle push, it opened with a creak that echoed through the house, a sound that made Pedro freeze for a second. The air inside was heavy, dense as if it wasn't just the dust accumulated over the years, but something more. Something that was waiting for him. As he entered, the darkness seemed almost solid, enveloping. But his eyes soon adjusted, and that's when he saw it. In the middle of the room, on an old dusty table, was a key, an old worn key, as if it had been used countless times. Pedro hesitated, feeling the air around him vibrate with the whispers that were now almost deafening in his mind. The whispers seemed to beg him to take the key. They promised answers, they promised knowledge, and as Pedro moved forward, his breathing quickened and his hand outstretched, the feeling that the key held something beyond human comprehension only grew. But then, a sound made him stop. A soft sigh. Or was it a laugh? He didn't know where it came from, but it was clear. He wasn't alone in that attic. And at the same time, down below, something was awakening in Anna's mind. That same night, while Pedro hesitated before the key in the attic, Anna was sitting in the darkness of the room, with her knees drawn up against her chest. She tried with all her might to push away the whispers that surrounded her, but it was useless. They were everywhere, in the walls, in the wind that crept through the cracks in the dark corners that seemed to stretch beyond what her eyes could see. The whispers were clearer now. They were no longer just disjointed murmurs. No. Now the words made sense, and the sense was horrible. Anna, with her young and impressionable mind, was absorbing each and every one of those sentences. The most terrifying thing was that the whispers were talking about her darkest thoughts, her deepest fears, and something more. In that moment, the voice transformed, changing from a muffled sound to something more real, almost human. It was as if the house was alive, and Anna was the one chosen to hear its secrets. Secrets that she didn't want to know, but that, at the same time, she couldn't ignore. As if a part of her already knew what the house wanted. The ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse, almost breathing along with her, and her mind filled with images, quick and distorted, of things that had never happened, but that she could feel as if they were real. Her brother, Pedro, appeared in flashes, his face distorted by an expression she had never seen before. And then her parents, but not as she knew them. They were distorted, dark versions carrying secrets they had never revealed. Anna closed her eyes tightly, trying to block it all out, but the whispers became silent screams in her mind. "You have your secrets too, Anna," the voice said, cold and cruel, "and the house knows them all." Suddenly, the door to her room opened by itself, slowly. The sound of the creaking echoed through the hallway, and Anna, paralyzed with fear, stared into the darkness beyond the door. The house seemed more alive than ever, and now it wasn't just a voice, it was a presence. Anna stood up slowly, as if guided by an invisible force, and began walking toward the hallway. Each step she took seemed to pull her deeper into the mystery, closer to the truth that the house whispered incessantly. As Anna followed the whispers, Pedro, still in the attic, felt something strange, a feeling that his sister was hearing the same things he was, the same terrible truth. In that suffocating dawn, the tension that enveloped the house reached its peak. The air was heavy, almost palpable, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The whispers, which until then had been subtle and almost disconnected, now seemed like a growing conversation, with a force that João could no longer ignore. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his hands clenched into fists, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions that were bubbling inside him. The anger he felt, however, was not his own. Or was it? It was hard to tell. He had always been a calm, balanced man, but ever since they moved into that house, something dark, something buried deep inside him, began to emerge. And that night, the whispers, which had previously seemed distant, began to speak directly to him, like old friends revealing forgotten secrets. "Do you remember, João? You can't hide it from us. We know." João stood up abruptly, the sound of the chair scraping across the floor echoing through the kitchen. He tried to push away the thoughts that were infiltrating his mind, but it was like trying to hold sand slipping through his fingers. What the house was whispering wasn't new. It was memories he had buried long ago, vague images of a past he didn't want to revisit. John's hands were shaking, his eyes fixed on a distant spot on the wall. The words of the whispers mixed with his own subconscious, a mixture of repressed desire and suffocating guilt. And then the voice came, soft and insidious. "You can do it. It's inside you, John. It always has been." It was a suggestion, almost an order, and John, without realizing it, felt the blood pulse in his temples, the anger rising until it boiled over. He no longer knew if he was thinking for himself or if it was the house that controlled him. The whispers became deafening, full of promises and secrets. His fists clenched tightly. He was on the brink of something dangerous and irreversible. It was then that, without any warning, he exploded. With a fury he didn't recognize in himself, João swept the table with one blow, throwing plates and glasses to the floor. The sound of the broken glass echoed through the house, but it didn't bring relief. On the contrary, it seemed to give more life to the whispers. What had he just done? Why did he feel a macabre satisfaction mixed with terror? The air around him became even denser, and the whispers laughed. They knew, they were testing him, and he had failed. In the distance upstairs, Ana and Pedro also felt something change. They were no longer alone with their thoughts. Something was being revealed, but what the house still hid was still there, deep down, waiting for the next step. Ana was sitting on the floor in the hallway, in front of Pedro's room, when she heard the crash coming from downstairs. The sound of the glass breaking reverberated through the house like a muffled thunder, and she felt the echo of it in her chest, a cold tingle running down her spine. But what disturbed her most was not the noise itself, but the silence that followed. A thick, almost suffocating silence, as if the house were holding its breath, waiting to see what would come next. She knew what had happened. Even without having seen it, even without having gone downstairs, Ana felt it. It was as if the whispers had become a living presence inside her, sharing secrets that went beyond the walls of that house. And in that moment, they were stronger than ever, more insistent. "They know," Ana whispered to herself, without realizing she was speaking out loud. She hugged her knees to her chest, shivering. It wasn't from the cold, but from an uneasiness she couldn't explain. She knew something had changed in her father. She felt his anger like a flame burning inside her, fueled by the dark secrets that the house had been whispering. But there was more than anger. There was something even more disturbing growing, a desire. Ana didn't know how, but the voices in the house were intertwining with the deepest and darkest thoughts of each of them. At night, when the wind cut through the cracks, when everything was silent, she heard the murmurs revealing things that no one spoke out loud. They weren't just desires or anger. They were grudges, small, subtle, hidden in the back of their minds. She remembered a time when she wished Pedro would disappear just because of a silly fight between brothers. Of course, she would never say it out loud, but now the whispers recalled that thought as if it were a secret that the house kept to itself. And the worst, was that Pedro was listening too. That night, he didn't seem the same. Something in his eyes had changed, as if he were seeing everything from a new perspective, a dark perspective. The way he had looked at her before he went up to the attic, the way his lips had curved into a smile that wasn't his. "He knows," Anna whispered again, her heart pounding. The voices inside her grew clearer. The house seemed to be forging new paths in their minds, filling in the gaps with twisted truths and unspoken secrets. But what did Pedro know? And what would he do with it? In the distance, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the stairs, and Anna knew her father was approaching. The air around her grew even thicker, the whispers more insistent. And it was at that moment that she felt for the first time the true danger the house represented. Joan's footsteps sounded heavy on the wooden floor, echoing like war drums, reverberating through the dark corridors of the house. Anna stood still, feeling her father's presence approaching, but what made her tremble was not just the sound. It was the sensation of something terribly wrong coming along with him, a force she could not name, but recognized as dangerous. The whispers grew more intense, more urgent, as Joan's shadow appeared at the end of the hallway. He looked different. His eyes were shadowed, fixed on something far away, a dark determination on his face that Anna had never seen before. She wanted to speak, wanted to ask what he was doing, but the words would not come. The house, or perhaps it was something deeper, seemed to silence her. She could only watch, unable to move. As he passed her, Joan did not even look at his daughter. It was as if she were invisible, as if he were completely focused on one thing. His breathing was heavy, his steps firm, and Anna knew deep down that he was going to do something terrible, something that the house, with its incessant whispers, seemed to demand of him. As he disappeared into the darkness, Anna felt her body relax for a brief moment, as if the invisible pressure around her had eased for a second. But soon the whispers returned, stronger than ever, and this time they seemed to come from within her. They urged her on, pulling her toward the inevitable. She needed to find Pedro. Something was about to happen, and she knew her brother was involved. The whispers were connecting each of them, tying their minds and actions with invisible threads of fear and resentment. As she descended the stairs, Anna felt the air around her vibrate almost alive, as if the house was on the verge of revealing its true power. Each step she took her deeper into a mystery she didn't want to unravel, but from which she couldn't escape. The house wanted something from them, and she didn't know if she had enough strength to resist. Pedro. Where was Pedro? Hannah's bare feet barely made a sound as she descended the stairs, but in the stillness of the house, every breath, every subtle shift of movement felt amplified. The whispers were no longer faint murmurs, no longer hidden in the corners of her mind. They were insistent now, louder, crawling under her skin and winding tighter with every step she took. The house wasn't simply alive, it was hungry. She reached the bottom of the stairs, her heart pounding as if it had taken on the rhythm of the house itself. Her father, Joan, had disappeared into the shadows, swallowed by the heavy atmosphere that thickened around them all. Anna knew something terrible was about to happen, but the house seemed to know it too. It was feeding on the tension, the fear, and it wanted more. The whispers guided her steps, pulling her towards the one place she hadn't dared to go since the first night, the attic. Pedro was up there still, his curiosity likely leading him deeper into whatever secrets the house kept hidden. The key. She didn't know how she knew, but something told her that everything would change once Pedro found that key. A key to unlock something they were never meant to find. Anna. Her heart nearly stopped. The voice wasn't a whisper, it was real, or at least, it sounded real. Her mother's voice, faint but clear, echoed from the shadows behind her. Anna turned slowly, eyes scanning the darkness, but there was no one, not a sign of Clara. Yet the voice came again. Anna, don't. It wasn't a warning, it was a plea. Anna stood frozen, torn between listening to her mother and the pull of the house. The whispers became more desperate, as if they sensed her hesitation, urging her to keep moving. She could almost feel their impatience crawling up her spine. With trembling hands, She pushed open the door leading to the attic stairs. The air grew colder, thicker, as if every step up was taking her closer to the heart of the house's secrets. The creak of the old wood beneath her feet was almost drowned out by the sound of her breathing and the incessant whispers that now felt like 1,000 voices in her head. Pedro was there, standing in the center of the attic, holding the key. His back was to her, his posture tense, as if he were listening intently to something that only he could hear. The key glinted faintly in his hand, the metal dark and old, as if it had been hidden there for centuries, waiting. "Pedro," Ana whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. He turned to her, his eyes wide, but there was something wrong. His expression was blank, hollow, as if he were no longer fully there. He held up the key, and for a moment, Ana thought she saw something flicker in the shadows around him, like the faint outline of a figure. "Ana," he said, his voice distant. "It's all true. The house, it knows everything. It's been waiting for us." "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaking. She could feel the air around them pulsing, alive with the whispers. "The key," he said, looking down at it. "It unlocks everything." Before she could stop him, Pedro moved toward a small door on the far side of the attic. A door neither of them had noticed before, as if it had been hidden by the shadows themselves. The whispers grew louder, frantic, as if urging him to turn the key, to open whatever was behind that door. "Pedro, no!" Ana rushed forward, her heart pounding, but it was too late. The key slid into the lock with a sharp click. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness. But it wasn't just the absence of light, it was a darkness that felt alive, shifting, swirling, as if it were waiting for them to cross the threshold. A cold, heavy wind rushed through the attic, making the old house groan in response. And then the whispers stopped. Everything fell silent. The air was so still, it felt like the entire house was holding its breath. Ana stood frozen, staring at the open door, while Pedro seemed entranced by the darkness that beckoned to him. "Pedro, we have to go," Ana whispered. But even as she said it, she knew it was too late. The house had been waiting for this moment. For them. Suddenly, Pedro took a step toward the darkness. "No!" Ana screamed, grabbing his arm, trying to pull him back, but the pull of the house was too strong. Pedro turned to her, his eyes filled with something she didn't recognize. It wasn't fear. It wasn't curiosity. It was acceptance. "It's too late, Ana," he whispered. "We belong to the house now." And with that, he stepped into the darkness. Ana felt a rush of cold air engulf her, pulling her toward the open door. The whispers returned, louder than ever, surrounding her, consuming her. But through the cacophony of voices, she heard one clear whisper. "Run!" It was her mother's voice again, stronger this time. And Ana listened. She turned and ran, her feet barely touching the steps as she flew down the attic stairs, her heart racing, the air around her suffocating. The house seemed to pulse with anger, the walls creaking and groaning as if trying to stop her. But she kept running. She reached the front door, her hands fumbling with the lock. The whispers were everywhere now, screaming in her ears, but she didn't stop. With a final pull, the door flew open, and Ana stumbled into the night, gasping for breath. The house loomed behind her, silent once more, its windows dark and empty, as if nothing had happened, as if it hadn't just claimed her brother. Ana fell to her knees, staring up at the mansion that had taken everything from her. The whispers had stopped, but she knew the house wasn't done, not yet. And somewhere deep inside she knew she would never truly escape. The house always got what it wanted.